What's going on, humans? And welcome to a new Psicoactivo. So, I was supposed to interview Dr. Celestino Piotti today, but my electricity was cut at my home and all morning, so I couldn't interview him. We had to postpone for next week, what you can expect for that one. However, this week has been very eventful and what you could call my bread and butter, which is psi phenomena. That's the reason my channel is called Psicoactivo, because I believe that the nuts and bolts are not the most important aspect of the phenomenon that we have to study. I think that if we understand ourselves first, the UFO phenomenon will be understood quickly and faster too. And I had been looking for that eureka moment because I don't know if I've been one of the few people in the English speaking world who have been actively speaking about Dr. Jacobo Grinberg's work. I still wholeheartedly believe that his work is amongst the most important studying psychological phenomena and parapsychology too. And I think that his Syntergic Theory coincides with a recent addition to all of the psi phenomena media pieces, which is the Telepathy Tapes. And as you guys know, in the Ida Cuellar documentary, Dr. Grinberg was making a paper while conducting an experiment that was going to eventually become a scientific paper that would be peer-reviewed. This paper is called the Transfer Potential Experiment. And that essentially tells you of how human minds remain entangled after conducting a series of experiments. And when Dr. Grinberg was about to go to India to conduct the experiment with satellite technology, he disappeared. The telepathy tapes have made one of the biggest discoveries in human history. I can confidently say that. It is not really a discovery per se, because this has been happening under our noses for decades now. But Miss Ky Dickens and Dr. Diane Powell deserve all the credit for bringing this to a more broader audience. And I think that they should get at least nominated for a Nobel Prize because of what they have been studying all this time. Essentially, in a nutshell, and I'm not going to spoil much for you guys because you guys need to listen to the telepathy tapes. They studied nonverbal autistic children and the innate abilities they have of telepathy and other psi abilities. Telepathy is just the tip of the iceberg. And as the Syntergic Theory does state, the brain is a quantum machine that is capable of creating reality. That is what Dr. Grinberg studied throughout his entire career. He studied Mexican shamans to understand how people with these skills could manipulate the reality around them. And that is exactly what these nonverbal autistic children are capable of. As I said, this is just the tip of the iceberg. They are capable of doing many more things, not just telepathy. And I think it's very important to note that we are heading towards, with this study, a different reality of the phenomenon that has to do, coincidentally, with the view that Dr. Amit Goswami has about the phenomenon. Here's Dr. Goswami a few months ago when we spoke on Psicoactivo, telling me what he believes the phenomenon is. Here it is.
Well, it's not very glamorous. It's something that Carl Jung already expressed a long time ago. I think the phenomenon is mainly psychological. However, not the kind of psychology we think immediately. It's not a kind of regular psychology, not the local psychology. It's very much the non-locality is at the heart of it. This is where I get interested. So what I'm saying is that, look, we already have known enough physics to suggest that there is no physical connection possible with extraterrestrial civilization. Also, the question that physicists ask, where are they? Because if it were possible physically, there are so many more civilizations that are more mature than ours, conceivably, that we would have encountered them, but we haven't, and we won't, because it is really very difficult to see, although people keep trying, any physical way of traversing, all those ideas that you hear. They're all science fiction, wormhole and that Star Trek kind of thing. No, that is impossible. So it has to be a non-local consciousness phenomenon. That's the first thing. And then my take is that we have this phenomenon of reincarnation.
Okay.
Reincarnation, if properly understood, which I wrote a book called Physics of the Soul. We now have a full-fledged theory of reincarnation. Reincarnation is a non-local memory transfer from one person to another.
Okay.
In the future. That's what reincarnation is about. Transfer of certain learning abilities and associated physical events that led to the learning abilities. That's what it stands for. So if you take that idea and the fact that correlation, non-local correlation, that entanglement is not that hard to produce. Simple intention, like we have experiments already where a healer, a real healer who does this frequently, so a sort of professional healer, can pray at a distance without meeting a person, just having his name in front of him, and already can affect the healing of that person at a distance by his prayers. So it shows that non-local correlation requires, yes, local interaction of some kind, but the local interaction can be in this very simple form, just reading somebody's name. So it is not, therefore, unthinkable that a person in the faraway planet, because they would have the same knowledge that we have, that there are other such planets, just make this intention that I will reincarnate in one such planet. And then start reincarnating here.
Okay.
Are there such beings?
That's a very interesting view.
And say there are such beings already. We find many beings who constantly tell, where am I? What is this? Very surprised in seeing some of the behavior. Their behavior don't match ours. So there are such people. At one point we started calling them this, what was that? Purple children, or what was it?
Indigo?
The indigo children, right? Indigo children. So that became a phenomenon. Then it died down because, studying indigo children. But indigo children was telling us something very specific, that these people are not growing up here. I met some indigo children that were about age 16, but their moral sense is so much higher than the average child that I would meet. So I was very impressed. This was in Chile. So indeed, that's a phenomenon, and there are similar phenomenon that have been always. People who just don't fit in. But the sociocultural condition, especially today, no thanks to the internet, is just so ubiquitously same. Everybody staying in a village in India gets the same education, same upbringing as somebody sitting in Mexico, or somebody sitting in remote corner of Africa, because once you open up to the internet, the community becomes actually the same. The behaviors are always the same, clothes are the same, music is the same, thinking is the same. worldviews are the same. So where is this happening? Part of it happened from our own reincarnation. Some of our more mature had many incarnations, so we learned a lot. So that's one factor. But the sociocultural behavior, we still behave the same way. I mean, Jacobo, me, you, when we go out and we still behave the same way. I mean, we don't behave differently. But this indigo children is a good example of who could not fit in with the kids of their age. That's why they were noticed.
So that's interesting, right? He talks about reincarnation. He talks about indigo children, which are some of the most woo aspects of the phenomenon. And a lot of this talk has been considered like new age talk. But this, from the autistic children that Ky Dickens and Dr. Powell have been researching, tells us that there may be some truth to some of this stuff. Here is Miss Ky Dickens speaking to Mr. Grant Cameron, who had her on the show on his channel about 2 weeks ago, talking about the telepathy tapes, but specifically talking about a place where all of these kids with telepathy skills go to and they hang out there. It's called The Hill. And apparently there are multiple hills. It's not just one of them. But this is Miss Ky talking about the reincarnation that these kids have mentioned to their parents. Here she is.
We should probably talk about The Hill just because we haven't. But I will say this, like for people who are, really deep within the behind the philosophy around ufology and stuff, and Diana Pasulka, what I would say is these kids are the people outside of the cave. You talk about the cave a lot, like where, people think that what is real is, the puppetry on the inside of the cave. And they are the people who can access well beyond the cave and can see more and know more about what's real. And to your point, there's a lot of overlap. And I think, of course, these individuals are impressed by their environment. They can hear thoughts, they're picking up energy. So if their family has a deep, devout mindset in some way, they often will interpret the world through that lens. But I will say that a lot of the children have talked about reincarnation. Mia, when I first met her, this is actually a really funny story, if I can just share it really quick, because her parents are devout Catholics. Here's their daughter saying that she's telepathic. They actually took her to have an exorcism done, not sure what was going on. They come to see me in California. We kind of validate this is all happening. They're scared. They don't want this. And at one point they were asking Mia questions once she first started communicating, because here she could communicate. And the thing that was really confusing to them is every time they went to a big family party in Mexico, she would flip out. And they were like, we don't get it. She loves food. She likes public places. She doesn't mind going to the mall, to the pool. And so when she first started communicating, they were like, why do you only flip out when we go to big family parties? And she's like, you put me in dresses and you put big earrings on me, and I don't like that. And they were like, well, why don't you like that? And she said, because in my past life, I was a male and I was a carpenter. And her parents were like, oh, she was Jesus, thinking. And then she's like, no, my name was Carlos, and I was born in Mexico City in 1850. And this is all about my life. And much of me still feels like Carlos. And so her parents were like, what? And just trying to make sense of it, and those stories come up quite a bit with the kids. And I was actually talking to an Orthodox Jewish man named Arthur Golden, who's been following this for years. He has a non-speaking son. They have a different hill in Israel with all Jews, with, mostly the Jewish population.
Wow.
Yeah. And he was telling me this yesterday. And I asked him some of these questions. I'm like, some of this stuff doesn't add up, with certain religions. And he said his son, Ben, talks about reincarnation. And he's like, however, if I talk to the deeply ultra-Orthodox rabbis, they will say that reincarnation is an aspect of the faith that is real. And so, yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. I think, some of the people I work with call them spiritual savants, that they are tapped in a way that we aren't in this physical world. Okay, so again, if you listen to the telepathy tapes, for people out there, we kind of unpeel this onion. But in episode 2, I've met the second individual, and I said, can other non-speakers do this? And he wrote yes. And then goes on to say all can. And I thought, well, that seems unlikely, right? And then I meet some individuals in Georgia, teenagers and 20-year-old kids that are non-speakers, or young men that are non-speakers, and they say they all can do that. And in fact, they even said, well, we hang out together on something that we've nicknamed the chat on the hill, where we can telepathically just kind of tune in, hang out. I went to a house of a young man who was doing this, and his mom will say, like, he puts all the pillows in his head to block out as much as he can, and that he even really developed a relationship with a girl on the hill. And that was hard to believe. I meet the girlfriend and her parents, and they were like, absolutely. In fact, like, there'll be times when they're both in the room doing this, and then they come down and have the same request, you know, stuff like that. So enough parents started saying this. I left there being like, well, maybe this is just in Atlanta. They're really close, so they do it with each other. I had not formed an opinion on it, and I was a little skeptical still. And then it started popping up all over the place. And a perfect example of this too, actually, is I met a teacher from Chicago. She'd not listened to the telepathy tapes. It hadn't been out yet when I met her. And she started talking to me about her kids in her classroom going to a place called The Hill. And so that like rattled me deeply, because I thought, okay, then maybe this is real. And as much as I've seen, it's still like, it's all still baffling. Okay, but then this is where it gets really crazy, is maybe a week ago, no, 2 weeks ago, I don't know, shortly ago, a mom was like, you have to meet this minister. He's a mega church minister in Arizona. He has all these kids in his program, a bunch of non-speakers, and apparently they are predicting the future and have telepathy. And so I get on the phone with him, and he's like, I'm writing a book about this. And I'm like, that's great, blah, blah, blah. And I said, have your children or have your non-speakers at your church met with other non-speakers? And he's like, we do like partnership programs with churches, or sometimes we get them together. Well, anyway, he starts telling me the story, and he's like talking about how these kids often, his kids will know stuff or talk about stuff that he has no idea what they're referencing. And he said, Cody, a young man in his congregation who's a non-speaker, was on the phone the other day with a young man in Minnesota. The young man in Minnesota, when he's logging off, said, come join me on the hill sometimes. And the minister, he's never listened to the telepathy tapes. He has no idea. So he's laughing. He's like, the hell? What the heck is the hell? The next day, Cody comes in to church or, you know, youth group or something. And he said, tell me about this hill. And Cody wrote, it's a place where we all hang out. Like, we can telepathically access it at any time. People from all over the world. People are talking about different things there. And it's great. And the minister, again, had no idea I've heard about this. My jaw is on the floor. And then he takes it one step further by saying, and then I look at Cody's communication partner, who's a woman who volunteers at the church, who helps with the spelling, and she holds the letterboard, or she prompts them. Okay, keep going. She looks at this woman, and the woman has a tear in her eye. And so this minister, Joe, is like, why are you crying? You know, and she said, I've been there. And she said, there's once in a dream, I see this hill, and there's all these, you know, children with autism on it. And it was so wonderful and so loving. And it's like, they didn't have their bodies there. It was just their beings. And I could understand. And she's like, I felt like I got a glimpse of it to tune my heart to them, was her language. And it was remarkable. And this is like where my world is now, right? So then yesterday I'm talking to Arthur Golden, who lives, you know, in a very ultra Orthodox community in Israel. And I bring up the hill to him, and I said, hey, does your son talk about the hill? And he goes, well, yeah, we have a different type of hill. There's hills all over. There's hubs all over. I think in America, you know, that's kind of the basis of the hill that you're talking about. And a lot of people with more of like agnostic or Christian bent. But the hill that Ben, his son, goes to is all, Jewish believers. And I was like, wow, fascinating. And so, you know, you take hundreds and hundreds of people talking about the same thing in isolated little silos. At a certain point, you're ignorant if you don't believe it. I think I didn't have a formed belief on much. You know, I think as a nonfiction storyteller, I'm open to everything. I'm always looking for truth. But now I completely believe telepathy is possible. I think it's the baseline of all communication. When we don't have a body, I believe that consciousness survives the body. And that's how we communicate, is through telepathy when you don't have a body. It's made me certainly believe in reincarnation, because it's come up so often. The thing that is really unbelievable is these kids often, they talk about God, they talk about angels. I mean, there's so much where it's like, you have to like re-alter all the things. And so much of it, I'm still trying to figure out. What I can tell what I can confidently say out loud where I feel like is true is that materialism is wrong. There's so much we don't see. There's so much that we're capable of that we don't appreciate. And so, yeah, and I've got 2 kids. I talk to them about all this stuff all the time. And, it's fun. My 10-year-old wants to watch Stranger Things with me now, and I make sure she doesn't watch the scary parts, whatever. But I'm able to sit there and be like, a lot of this is based in like real experiments that have happened, real studies. This is an extreme version of that, obviously. But something I haven't talked about yet, maybe season 2, is that a lot of these non-speakers are capable of telekinesis.
Yeah. So I found it really interesting that Dr. Goswami has an idea that we are essentially able to reincarnate in different planets. And that's how he explains that there's life all across the universe. That is funny because one of Jacobo Grinberg's last books was his autobiography. And in there, he talks about that at a certain point in his cosmic life, he was living in a different planet, and he made some transgressions that made him be exiled to Earth to live 12 lives, I think, and then return. That is really strange. I'm not going to lie, but that's what he wrote. He said that. And all of the knowledge that he amassed throughout the years of his most recent life, which was when he disappeared, that's a lot of knowledge for someone who has just lived one life. I don't know. I know I'm talking, maybe it sounds like I'm talking out of my ass, but I don't know. This kind of stuff does make more sense to me now that I've realized that all of these kids with telepathy skills, which, yes, it has been confirmed by the telepathy tapes, telepathy is real. Psi abilities are real. There are other things that we are capable of. It's not just that. The difference is that autistic kids are more in tune with that collective unconscious that Carl Jung talked about, or these Akashic records that people talk about. These kids are born with the capacity to access that place easier than we are. And it's funny because evolutionarily, we will eventually stop talking and use this more. Apparently, that is what neurodivergent people are moving towards, because my wife is neurodivergent. And I know this from firsthand experience. She doesn't have a good experience when she's trying to communicate with other people who speak a lot. She doesn't like talking too much. She does talk. She is a functional individual in this materialistic paradigm. She is functional, but she does struggle quite a bit too. Just to give you an example, when we go to a place where there's a lot of people there, she needs to use massive headphones so she doesn't feel like she's being overwhelmed by all the talking and all the energy that's around her. Another example is that she has one of her best friends is also neurodivergent. And there's been times when we're all together and they just start laughing without saying anything. And I just look around and I go like, what happened? And they just keep laughing. And then when I showed her this, she was like, yeah, I've told you that we communicate through telepathy. And I'm like, wait, okay. So yeah, it's real. It's happening. But the difference here is that I believe that we are capable of that too, but we need to practice. Dr. Hal Puthoff said it in that recent Beyond episode, that everybody has psi skills, but it's like a pro athlete and just a regular person. The pro athlete is born with innate capabilities, and the regular person has to work up to that. It is similar with psi skills, psi abilities. And I think that that's where the telepathy tapes are heading towards with the new episodes. They're only 8 episodes in, and they've investigated a couple of families, one little couple of a boyfriend and girlfriend who are both autistic, and they have dates where they're communicating telepathically constantly. And they documented this. And Ky Dickens was really taken aback by everything she's experienced with her research. So I reached out to her this week, and I reached out to Dr. Powell too. And they responded on the same day that I reached out to them. And they're currently going through the work that I've done with Dr. Grinberg. And Ky Dickens actually agreed to be on Psicoactivo on December 11th. So I'm going to be recording an episode with her on December 11th. By the time we speak, I already gave her all the material that I want her to check out. She will be more informed on what I want to talk to her about, because for me, joining the research that Ms. Dickens is doing with all of the work Dr. Grinberg has done that has been ignored by the scientific community for decades now. I don't know if his disappearance has something to do with him being ignored, but I've spoken to other people who are also psychophysiologists, who are very prominent in their fields. And they have told me that Dr. Grinberg's work is not some crackpot conspiracy theory. He was onto something. And I find it really interesting that some of the bigwigs within the UFO community, I've approached them to ask them about this, and they play coy. They ignore the question. They tell me they don't know who Grinberg was. They tell me that Grinberg's work has no substance. That is a lie. Dr. Grinberg's work has substance. He didn't want to explain what consciousness is. All he aimed to explain was the nature of perception and understanding the perception of reality. That was the main goal he had. And also to understand how us, as humans, with this quantum computer right here, are capable of creating reality. That's what he was all about. And that's why he created the Syntergic Theory, because he was fully convinced that all of us have these abilities. And now that it's been confirmed that it's real with these autistic children, I think that we are at a very interesting crossroads where mainstream science will have to make a decision on whether they pay attention to a case that is almost impossible to ignore now because it's a worldwide phenomenon, and take the road of actually trying to investigate this and understand humanity better, the human psyche better. That's the goal, to understand how we will eventually move up to a place where we can communicate with all of these autistic children. And the last part that I'm going to share with you has to do with Dr. Grinberg, where he talks about interhemispherical correlation, which is also hemisync. They practice this at the Monroe Institute. It is essentially similar, but it is interesting that Dr. Grinberg says that the people with the most balanced interhemispherical correlation usually bring up the other person that they're trying to sync with to their level. This is what the autistic children did with their parents, so their parents could understand them. And they were the ones who made it possible for the parents to hear voices in their heads, the voices of their children. So here's Jacobo talking about this interhemispherical correlation. Here it is.
Well, it has been very interesting to listen to everyone, and I agree with Dominique. The important thing is synergy. And I would like to tell you about an experiment we did in Mexico that is closely related to some of the things that have been discussed. For several years, we have been recording the activity of the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. And what we did was a program with a computer where the computer received the information from both hemispheres, compared it with each other, and depending on the result of the comparison, gave a series of signals to the subjects. For example, if the waveforms of the two hemispheres were very similar, the computer gave a very low tone, a low sound. If the shapes began to be different, the electroencephalographic shapes, it gave a high-pitched sound in such a way that the subject could know through a sound feedback system the state of his interhemispheric unification, and also learn to modify the interhemispheric relations. It could, for example, decide to increase the interhemispheric correlation by moving towards the low sounds, or decide to increase the difference, the lateralization, by moving towards the high sounds. We repeated this on more than 30 subjects for 3 or 4 years, because what we wanted to know is what was the experience of unification, that is, what was happening with the psychology of the subject when his two hemispheres began to work in a correlative way. And what the subjects reported in all cases is that as the interhemispheric correlation increased and the two hemispheres came to work coherently, their sensation was that of reaching or touching an ego center, a unity, an internal state of stillness, of peace, of coordination. That is, there was an isomorphism between their subjective experience and the interhemispheric correlation. In contrast, the less interhemispheric correlation there was, the less subjects reported a sense of dispersion. They felt bad. They felt they were not in unity. Very interesting. The most trained subjects reported that when they were able to control at will the interhemispheric correlation, that is, to increase or decrease it at will, they began to feel as if they were in an existence, in a state, in an extracerebral location. That is, I don't mean that they stepped out of their body and saw their body, but that they felt that their experience was located in a place that was no longer right-left, but included both. In one experiment, what we did was to interact people who normally remain in a state of high interhemispheric correlation. All of us have oscillations in our interhemispheric interaction. There is, unless we are veteran meditators, no state of continuity in the interhemispheric correlation. We oscillate. Sometimes there is more correlation, sometimes there is less correlation. We have patterns of interhemispheric correlation that are surely associated with these states of identity or non-identity, of unification or non-unification. So what we did was to interact subjects that were at different levels of correlation, and what we observed, similar to the transferred potential experiment, is that the subject that had the highest interhemispheric correlation always attracted the other subject to its level. This is pre-verbal interaction, right? Without verbalization, simply by the sensation of mutual presence, the subject with a low correlation began to increase it, and the one with a high correlation slightly decreased its correlation until they reached an equilibrium. And I think this is very interesting to think about in terms of the relationships between us humans, how we feel about each other, and to what extent someone's unified state changes the environment.
Yeah. So pretty mind-bending stuff, huh? And this is what this channel is all about. And I am going to keep trying to uncover and to know what we're all about. What are we capable of really? And I am pretty sure that this has been hitting on purpose for a while, but now that Ms. Dickens and Dr. Powell are out with their work, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. Let me know what you think in the comments. Again, December 11th, I'm going to speak to Ms. Ky Dickens. Thank you, Ms. Ky, for accepting the invitation. If you like the content you see, I'm going to ask you to please like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the bell icon. Everything helps. If you want to support the channel in any other way, there's a bunch of links in the description that you can take your pick. There's PayPal, buy me a coffee. You can buy yourself something. You can get something for the podcast on an Amazon wish list. But if you share, like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, that would be more than enough. So thank you for all the support. And without further ado, I'll see you guys until next week. Bye.